We are live.
Okay, so thank you everyone and welcome to day 2 of our international conference on the Rohingya crisis. The event is being organized by UCL Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction and the Center for Genocide Studies at the University of Dhaka. We are being funded by the British Academy and the Royal Society. So this is day 2 and we will have 5 different panel discussions today. The first panel discussion is on bringing some case studies from the camps in Bangladesh. It would cover violence and protection, gender, and host community impact. Then after a short tea break, there'd be a session in conversation with Rohingya activists. After that, we would go for a lunch break, and then our third panel discussion would be something related to justice issues and the International Court of Justice. Then again, there will be a short tea break, and our fourth session would be on Rohingya documentary and photo exhibition. After that, we would straight go to our closing session where the High Commissioner of Bangladesh in the United Kingdom and Professor Peter Sammons and Professor Imtiaz Ahmed would share their talk. That is it. Now I'm going to welcome Dr. Tawhidul Islam to start the first panel discussion of day 2 on Rohingya crisis and Bangladesh. Quickly, I want to introduce Dr. Tawhidul Islam. He works as an associate professor in the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Dhaka. He graduated from the same university and later completed an MA in Peace Studies and PhD from the University of Bradford, UK, with the prestigious Commonwealth Scholarship. He is interested to, he works on conflict analysis, disarmament, conflict prevention, peace building, and United Nations system. He has published widely on these topics related to post-conflict peace building, environmental concerns, potentials of conflict, and peace and security, and has received a number of awards and project grants. So now I would welcome Dr. Tawhid Islam to start the panel discussion 1. Dr. Tawhid, yes, thank you.
Thank you for your kind words, Dr. Bias. Just one thing to uh, let all of you know that my connection seems very poor. So let me to give a try first without the camera and let's see how it functions. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Also, we can, yeah, you're quite clearly visible. Or
Is that, yeah, can you
Yeah,
hear
we
me,
can
Dr.
hear.
Bias?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, great. So scholars, practitioners, activists, and all others, welcome to the second day of the International Conference on the Rohingya crisis in comparative perspectives. This is the first session which I'm moderating today on Rohingya crisis and Bangladesh. It is needless to say that the importance of this session as Rohingya crisis once evolved in Myanmar Many of them moved to Bangladesh for shelter to save their lives. And all we know that in 2017, more than 700,000 Rohingya people crossed the border and took refuge, and Bangladesh allowed them to take shelter on humanitarian ground. Both the state and the local people in Cox's Bazar welcomed them and provided assistance. And all we know that the world applauded this unprecedented event. The international community joined later and offered all sorts of humanitarian assistance. Nevertheless, 3 years have been passed by now, and despite different initiatives and talks of repatriating them to their home country, Myanmar, it has not yielded any productive result yet, as we have heard yesterday. However, in this interesting panel, there are 3 presentations, all coming from the parts of the British Academy funded research project, Rohingya Journeys of Violence and Resilience in Bangladesh and its neighbors, historical and contemporary perspectives. As a part of that, 3 teams worked and conducted research on 3 specific areas. Number 1 was violence and protection of Rohingyas in Myanmar and Bangladesh from certain unsafety to uncertain security conditions. Was on gender-based violence, and the title is quote, "They are too dirty to rape," end quote, the making of a genocidal discourse, gender-based violence against the Rohingyas. This research has been conducted by Professor Dr. Amena Mohsin and Muhammad Atiq Rahman. He worked with him as research associate. And the third one is resilience of the Rohingya hosting communities in Ukia and Teknaf, Cox's Bazar, just adjusting or strategizing for everyday survival, which I was involved in this research. And with me, Tanzina Rahman, she worked as a research associate. Without further ado, let me to begin the session. But before beginning it, one thing I need to clarify to all 3 speakers is that they will have 15 minutes each for their presentation. And my understanding is that Dr. Nilay, who will be presenting from the first research, and Muhammad Atiq Rahman, he will be presenting the second, and Tanzina Rahman, she will be presenting the third one. So before I before I request Dr. Nilay, let me to introduce Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed. He's a professor of international relations and director of the Center for Genocide Studies at the University of Dhaka. He's also currently a visiting professor at the Associate University Beirut, and he has authored, co-authored, and co-edited 26 books. His recent publication include the following edited books: University of Dhaka, Making, Unmaking, Remaking, and it was a joint edited books published from Prathama Prakashana. And he published another book, Genocide and Mass Violence, Politics of Singularity, from the Center of Genocide Studies. And his another recent publication is Women, Veiling and Politics. It was published from the University Press Limited, Dhaka. On the other hand, Dr. Nilay Ranjan Bishwas, he is an associate professor of the Department of International Relations at the University of Dhaka. In 2016, he completed his PhD in international politics from the City University of London. He was a recipient of Fulbright Fellowship to conduct his MA in Security Policy Studies at the George Washington University, Washington, D.C. He has published in many recognized national and international journals in relation to international politics, peacekeeping, etc. So now I request Dr. Nilay Ranjan Bishwas to present his work. Dr. Bishwas, it's all up to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tawhid. It's a great opportunity, and I thank the organizers to organize this conference, and also particularly this panel to project three studies on the situations of Rohingya refugees, particularly after 2017, there is an exodus that they have. Let me share my screen shortly, and I think I can start my presentation from here. Is it visible on the screen?
Yes, it is.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So as you can see the title, and this is a study that Professor Imtiaz Ahmed and I are conducting since, particularly the fieldwork has been conducted since mid-2019. And the title that we are thinking of is The Violence and Protection of Rohingyas in Myanmar and Bangladesh. From certain unsafety to uncertain safety. It requires 10-second explanations of what we mean by certain unsafety and uncertain safety. The assumption that we are doing and the evidence that we have received from the series of micro narratives or stories that we received from the Rohingya refugees in the camps living in Cox's Bazar. I think it is important to mention and highlight the state of Myanmar's protection racket, or the violence that they have conducted, which had excluded Rohingya as from their own citizenship and their basic rights as the citizen of the state Myanmar, which we think is which has made Myanmar a place of certain unsafety. Nevertheless, when we are talking about repatriation, which is the most important thing, we need to also understand that if there is no safe zone in Myanmar, and if the Rohingyas are repatriated, then we cannot also ensure, and by this we, that means that, you know, if that includes the state of Myanmar, international community, and everyone, and if the safety is not ensured in Myanmar, so the safety that we are thinking of constructing will be uncertain as well. So this is the journey that we found from the stories of Rohingya refugees in the camps that we have collected. The major query that we had in our mind when we framed this study was, you know, there is a dialectic or a nexus between violence and protection, the ideas of violence and protection, and how that can explain the trends of violence of the Rohingyas. And obviously, these nexus is not only considering particular types of violence, but we also have looked at different structural, cultural, and other types of violence as well. Also, we put a special emphasis on how has the protection mechanism of the state, and particularly the Myanmar state, has reproduced violence again and again. And if one would like to, you know, bring a particular starting point, one can definitely think of 1982 Citizenship Act. But, you know, what the state of Myanmar has done in the name of protection has reproduced violence against its own citizens, i.e. Rohingya. So through our study, we tried to understand this violence protection dialectic. So how violence created some sense of, different kinds of protections, or even protection reproduced violence for the Rohingya people. And we also analyzed different trends and patterns of violence, conducted against the Rohingya population in the state of Myanmar, and on their journey from Myanmar to Bangladesh in the recent exodus. I'll not go into a very detailed explanation of the theoretical side, because I would like to put more emphasis on the micro narratives and the clustering of the different stories that we have had it from our fieldwork. But very quickly, one or two things that we'd like to highlight or flag is that the way how we have defined violence. There are scholars and Eastern scholars who have defined violence in various ways. I think one thing that is very important for us to understand, that visibility or directness of violence is not the only violence that we experience. So that was very important for us to understand. For example, we define violence as an outcome of an exclusionary process practiced by the state or other authoritative actors to discriminate against others who are relatively less powerful. So there is a sense of subalternness among the people who are in fact the victims of violence, and there is a thing, there is a issue of authoritarianism and authority who practices or perpetrators of violence. We need to also understand that the protection mechanism reproduces violence. That is very important for us. For example, for the state of Myanmar, who have created this entire legal, institutional, and kind of a garrison state of Myanmar to create protection for its quote unquote own citizens, and in this entire process they have created an entire violent structures for many other ethnic people, and Rohingyas are one of the significant victims of this state-based protection mechanism of Myanmar. We need to also think about sometimes in the host state, refugees or people who are persecuted and had to flee from one country to another may face some sort of violence as well. So international humanitarian principles are there to kind of check and balances and to see whether the refugees are facing some sort of violence within the protection mechanisms of the host state as well. So these are some of the issues that we kept in mind. Johan Galtung, Slavoj Zizek's idea of structural or subjective violence, not only the direct violence are important, but one need to also look at how violence is explained by an actor, an individual, and violence is inherent in the structure, violence is inherent in the culture and practices of the institutions of a state. As to understand the violence that Rohingyas have faced for decades, I think it is important to look at these exclusionary processes of the violence. As part of the methodology, I think it is important to explain that why we think micronarratives is a very strong methodological tool, and it is not only a methodological tool, but also it explains a philosophical aspect of why it is important to consider individuals' experience to understand the patterns of violence. I'd like to suggest that the way how we understand micronarrative, that these are basically certain patterns of stories that begin to emerge when a large number of stories is collected and plotted around certain metadata options. So we have the grand narratives or meta narratives, but at the same time, it is very important to consider how an individual experience the particular act of violence. It is also the stories where number is not really important, but it is important to look at the appearances of variation of clusters of violence, particularly in the context when we are looking at the variation of different patterns of violence. It is important to go into a deeper analysis using those different types of violence, which not only suggests that whether and what occurrences has happened, but also to go deep into understand what are the qualitative variations that different types of violences can portray and suggest the situations of Rohingya people. The reference of micronarratives and its importance in understanding the patterns of violence goes back to two particular important events. One is, of course, 1930s debate between Albert Einstein and Rabindranath Tagore, where in reply to Einstein's question, Tagore has mentioned, and I particularly quote one sentence where he says that, quote, truth is realized through man, unquote. And that is very important for us to understand that how a person's individual experience is very important, and what we experience or the ontological experience of the particular event cannot be devoid of an individual experience. So the subjective explanation is very important. So this is definitely the second point is this is very this is definitely critical of this particular phenomenological approach is critical of the so-called rationalistic or value-free approach of scientific studies, where number is more important. Nevertheless, in micronarratives, we emphasize on individuals' narrative and experience, and that makes the philosophical aspects or philosophical standpoint of what we basically try to understand as violence is. So total 75 micronarratives has been collected, roughly 59 male and 16 females. The time frame was a little less than 1 year, and we have covered more than 1/4 of the camps in Ukia and Teknaf. in the greater Cox's Bazar area. So when the data was analyzed of the 75 macro narratives and of the Rohingya people of different age categories, we could find more than 20 layers of violence, and we divided that. When we followed Galtung's or Slavoj Zizek's sort of classification, we thought that the violence clusters that we found in terms of the direct killings or direct or physical violence are quite significant, and this is the experience that they have. Most of the Rohingya respondents have faced just not only before when they were expelled or they had to come back, they were forcefully sent back to Bangladesh, but it was well before that as well. So some of these direct or physical violence were experienced by the Rohingya respondents or by their family members even before 2017. So this direct and physical violence doesn't only say that this was a one-time experience for them and they were uprooted from their homelands. So some of those experiences were, for example, killings and mass killings, forced labor, deportation, forcible transfer of population, rape and sexual violence, intimidation and persecution, specific examples of killing of small children from mothers and slaughtering and burning them, burning of houses and properties, indiscriminate shooting, beating or hacking to death, setting up landmines and injuries followed up, abductions and imprisonments. Now, as researchers following the particular approach of phenomenology or collecting individual stories, we didn't try to actually cluster that what is the percentage or what is the number of that. So it was more important for us to see that how different types of violence were actually narrated and accounted for by throughout the micro narratives that we have collected in this process. Now, some of the narratives or some of the respondents as part of their narratives have mentioned, for example, Minara, a 25-year-old Rohingya woman, in our interview or story collection process has mentioned that we were always living in the fear because their torture was brutal. They used to beat people over the slightest exchange of words, charged people with monetary fines, put us in jail, and continued repressing everyone. We feared them. We couldn't even claim our own land as our own. Now, this was not the case of 2017, just before the expulsion. It was an experience that many Rohingya respondents in our micro narratives have actually claimed or mentioned as a regular practice. For example, Harish says that after our abolishment of citizenship, we lived our lives in a state of confinement and surveillance. It was needed to seek permission from the Burmese army when we wished to visit our relatives. Permission was required to move from one place to another. To obtain the permission, we had to pay money to them. And Golfarash shared her experience. In fact, the day before what she and her family has faced before they were uprooted from the home. She says that male members of her family hid in the forest. The military came and tortured the women, killed many of them. This is how the repression went. Their gold, money, livestock, ducks, hence everything was taken. They could not protest. If anyone protested, she or he was killed. So this is a very small part of the 75 micro narratives that we have collected, but it definitely shows that how the violence, not only direct violence, but also the structural and subjective violence were perpetrated by the state of Myanmar, by their different actors. Now, some of the issues that we have also clustered from in the context of structural or subjective violence, and it has continued since late 1970s. For example, one particular reference was always mentioned by them, that the way how their citizenship was snatched away. So 1982 Citizenship Act, and it was quite fascinating to see even someone who has not had enough education background, but he or he is also aware that the process how they were excluded from the citizenship, they were excluded from their rights of casting votes, and how they actually considered that as a normal practice, because they thought that we have to live in Myanmar, and this is the way how we live in Myanmar. So loss of Rohingya identity, 1974 Emergency Immigration Act imposed ethnicity-based identity cards. So their identity cards is definitely different from the other ethnic people who are basically considered as citizens, unlike the Rohingyas. They do not have access to
Dr.
education.
Levi, 1 minute, please.
Can I have like 2 or 3 minutes? I'll finish quickly. Thank you. So restrictions on their movements, loss of land holdings, restrictions on marriages, and of course restrictions on having children, and unintended consequences, particularly for unregistered babies. So those are some of the clusters that are important to understand that how violence is rooted structurally over there. So the protection that Myanmar state has produced through the identity cards, the birth registration, death registration, villages surrounded by security forces, movements, restricted by the law enforcement agencies, restriction of land ownership, and different interrogations during the religious practices have created a reproduced violence for the Rohingya people quite significantly. Now, I'm not going to read out because of the time constraints, but their journey from Myanmar to Bangladesh was quite significant, and it is also important to understand that how that explains violence has been reproduced in their way from Myanmar to Bangladesh as well. The last thing that I'd like to highlight is in the host state, when we interviewed from the 75 micronarratives, we also found that, they were quite happy with the way how they were welcomed, despite they probably have some, issues regarding health facilities, or maybe education, or maybe, communications systems, or telephone facilities, networks and things like that. But broadly, they have really praised, how they were welcomed and how government of Bangladesh and international agencies are treating. I'd like to quote one thing that was quite interesting, that one participant in her micronarrative said that her image regarding the security forces have changed after looking at the security forces in Bangladesh in the Rohingya refugee camps, because she had a very different image of security forces who are only repressive, unlike the way how they are treated in the Rohingya camps is quite different. I have some statistics from Bangladesh Peace Observatory, which says that in the host country or near the refugee camps, they have some experiences of violence as well. For example, from August 2017 to September 2020, there are 564 incidents, 180 death, and 300 injuries. And there is more clusters of the violence. And if you see that, I only would like to highlight that the violent incidents between law enforcement agencies and Rohingyas as criminals, which is identified in the national newspapers, says that most of the incidents are from there. So this table can be explained in the Q&A sessions if someone is more interested about it, but it also suggests that they are exposed to some extent in direct violence as well in the host country as well. Now, concluding all these ideas, I think it is important for us to look at that how the state of Myanmar has created an entire protection regime for its so-called own citizens, which have always excluded the minorities and particularly Rohingyas in this sector. So it is more important to put pressure or to think about the state of Myanmar and its legal institutional processes, which is very important. So when we talk about protection of refugees in the host countries, I think we need to more think of what are the role of community actors, for example, majis, teachers, imams, and so on and so forth. I think this is very important. Education is something that they have always highlighted in their micro-narratives, and they would like to turn themselves as human resources for their own country. I think we can think about communications. There are some improvements regarding that. Still, this is an issue which has also been highlighted in their micro-narratives. Security concerns for themselves as an individual is important, and sometimes we can only think about security of the state, but We forget the security of the individuals, security of the Rohingyas in home and host states. The final point is, and I think this is quite common in many micronarratives that we have found, that they are still confused about the home. They think that Myanmar is their home and they would like to go back. But it is not only about when question, that when they will go back. I think how question is very important, that how they will go back. Is Myanmar a safe place, and how Myanmar can be made a safe place for the Rohingyas to go back. I will stop here and be happy to answer any questions later. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for taking, I think, 2 or 3 extra minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Niloy. Thank you very much. I was having a trouble on my internet connection, so somehow I had on and off relationship with you. I believe it went well. And thank you very much for bringing all the issues of structural violence and subjective violence and state-based protection mechanisms that have created a condition for violence for the Rohingya people living in Rakhine State. And again, what sorts of challenges they are facing in the camps. You have highlighted all those things. Thank you very much. I believe all you can hear me because I am using an alternative connections. I believe it is working now better than my computer.
Yes, it is.
So let us move to the second. Okay, thank you. Let us move to the second presentation. And the title of this presentation is "They Are Too Dirty to Rape," quote unquote, the making of a genocidal discourse, gender-based violence against the Rohingyas. As mentioned before, Professor Amina Mohsin and Muhammad Atik Rahman has been involved in this research. Professor Amina Mohsin teaches in the Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, and she graduated from the same department and later received her MA and PhD degrees from the University of Hawaii, USA, and Cambridge University, UK. She has received several national and international fellowships, including Commonwealth Staff Fellowship, SSRC Fellowship, and Freedom Foundation Fellowship, etc. And she is one of the well-known and published academic in relation to nationalism and politics. Her one of the interesting book is The Politics of Nationalism, The Case of Chittagong Hill Tracts, Bangladesh. She has also published other 2 books on the Chittagong Hill Tracts, and she has another book written on ethnic minorities of Bangladesh, some reflection, the Shawtal and the Rakhines. And Muhammad Atik Rahman, he is an assistant professor at the Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka. He joined at the department in 2010, and he completed his graduate degree in the Department of International Relations at the University of Dhaka. And in 2013, he was awarded a World Intellectual Property Organization Fellowship to study Masters of Law, LLM, in Intellectual Property at the Turin School of Law, University of Turin, Italy. Prior to joining university, he is currently pursuing his PhD degree in the Department of Conflict and Development, Faculty of Political and Social Sciences, University of Ghent, Belgium. He has published in different national and international journals. So now I'd request Mr. Atik Rahman to present his work. Mr. Rahman, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tauhid, for your brief introduction. It's an opportunity, and good afternoon to all of you from Bangladesh. Myself, Muhammad Atik Rahman, and I am grateful to Professor Dr. Amina Mohsin, Madam, to give me this opportunity to present our some of the research findings in this international conference. Thanks, Madam. So am I audible to all of you and visible also, I think? So let me share my presentation slide, and then I'll move. So basically, our presentation title will be Creation of a Genocidal Discourse in Gender-Based Violence Against the Rohingya. And the introduction, in this introduction, I can say that basically we all believe that the refugee hit is not a choice. what makes refugee, or what are the push factors behind someone to take this refugee hit is varied from one country to another. However, one can't deny that the violence or act of genocide played a very crucial role to this refugee hit situation. In 2017, Bangladesh had to open its border and provide shelter to the largest influx of Rohingya community, people who had to flee from their country, Myanmar. The August 27 violence committed against the Rohingya was the culmination of decades of systemic, political, legal, and social persecution, discrimination, humiliation by the Myanmar state. No doubt the way the violence had been committed against them, it was a kind of Myanmar's final solution to its own Rohingya people. The research team is composed by a lead researcher, Professor Amina Mohsin, and myself, Mohammad Atiq Rahman. So we have been conducting this research in last 1 year. As Dr. Nila has already mentioned, we follow the same kind of research methodology to conduct and collect almost 75 document through a process of collecting micro-narratives in the Rohingya refugee camps on various community. Basically, we target our target population were the Rohingya women, but we also cover Rohingya male and children in our micronarrative collection process. So we have conducted this micronarrative study throughout this 2019, and we documented 75 stories, and we made a cluster. And based on this cluster, we had, outlined 4 major kind of a research objective that I'm going to tell you here. So the research objective is first to explore and understand the dynamics, basic causes, and impacts of gender-based violence upon the Rohingya community. So the specific objectives are to develop a linkage between the gender-based violence in a conflict-prone societies. We consider the Myanmar society itself, and then the understanding various dimensions of this GBV, both conflict and peacetime. Not to mention that sometimes, in a latent form the violence were there against this community. That the various dynamics of gender-based violence basically in manifest and latent forms. And finally, the objective was to try to understand from the historical perspectives, how the Rohingya persecution or how this genocidal discourse had been created in Myanmar over a period of time or decades. So areas of inquiry, when we prepared this, our research question and also the research objective to try to collect the micronarratives and also conducted literature review on these issues. So we made a storyline here. The first storyline starts from the genocidal discourse in Myanmar based on this constitutional, legal, political, and also at the social level. Then we also found some, the evidence of violence in 1978, 79, 1992, 2012, and 2017. Then we outline how this migration or how this population displacement has been done in 2007 from Myanmar to Bangladesh. And finally, we outline some of the, the coping mechanism or some of the problem they are facing in the Rohingya refugee camp in Cox's Bazar and all the Cox's Bazar and its surrounding areas. So the genocidal discourse, first of all, when we talk about that it's an opportunity, and the genocidal discourse that we found are leading politicians and the state officials in Myanmar. Sometimes they made they made a comment in the public spaces that towards the Rohingya community, when they were asked that why this Myanmar army, Tatmadaw, and their security forces had committed so many types of gender-based violence upon them. So they said that no, they are not committing this sort of violence because they're too dirty. They are too dirty for this sort of activities, and they have a very low standard of living and poor hygiene. So this kind of statement appeared in the media. It's clearly reflected a very different, hostile, and pejorative attitude towards the Rohingya community in Myanmar. It is a matter of question that why these dominant groups, authorities, and even the state set out to eradicate another group of people from the face of the earth. It is a process both at the cognitive and at the practical levels, no doubt. The acquisition and identification of the victims group has done by the coordinated acts of spreading rumor, propaganda, or also creating hate speech in the form of conspiracy or an imagined threat, which challenge the very survival of any particular community. For the particular, in the case of Rohingya community, the identity has been eroding, and they are in a enduring process of facing all sorts of differentiation, social stigmatization, scapegoating, and finally stateless person within their own country. Historical event shows this trajectory very well in this context. Like, as we have mentioned, the creation of No Citizenship Act the Citizenship Act in 1982, which made Rohingya as no citizen in Myanmar. The law does not recognize, in fact, the Rohingya as one of the 135 legally recognized ethnic groups in Myanmar, thus denying most of their Myanmar citizenship. The institutionalized discrimination worsened over time, and also deny the minimal right to vote has also been taken away from them in 2008 Constitution of the People's Republic of Union of Myanmar. Government withdraws temporary voting rights from Muslim Rohingya ahead of proposal constitutional reform, followed by the local protest or national level protest. We also have the accounts of violence. So violence in 1978, 1992, 2012, and finally in 2017. So based on our kind of a, the micro narratives, we have outlined some of the dynamics or factors of gender-based violence, which has been committed in Myanmar. So first of all, like no marriage without permission. So our respondent, when they talked about their experience in Myanmar, they said that they had to take permission from the local, the mob leader, which they call Ogata, to get married, and even they wanted to get married in a second time, they need to get permission from the local leaders. Rape and sexual violence is a regular kind of phenomena in this region, both in conflict and also in peacetime, because some of our the victims, survivors, they had mentioned that they were faced this sort of violence way before 2017, back in 2007 or 2010, 2011. So these were kind of a continuing acts of violence against them. Self-restriction and movement. Some of the respondent has also opined that because of the constant fear they are facing in the face of the state authority and the surrounding mob community or villages, they basically prohibited, self-restricted, or put on restriction on their girls' movement to move or to cross another village just to protect them from the molestation or stalking or eve-teasing kind of things. Frequent pregnancies, which was a common facts in Myanmar or in the Rohingya community, to avoid rape and all kind of sexual violence. Give bribe to arrange marriage. Even if they wanted to arrange a marriage, they have to give kind of a monetary compensation or bribe to the authority. No education, no higher education for the Rohingya children. We have met a person in the Rohingya camp, and he said that he was only allowed to study 10th grade in the Arakan school, but after that he was not getting admitted in the college to continue his higher education. Restriction on worship after 2012, the sectarian violence between the Mog and the Rohingya community in the Arakan region. So open like the Friday worship was prohibited in the mosque. So they were not allowed to pray in the mosque and all these things. So restriction on movement again. They are allowed to go to Mongdu from their village. For this they also have to pay some sort of money to get permission, and then they can go to Mongdu for their day-to-day business and all these things. So, and they cannot stay overnight in Mongdu. So in their own country, they are kind of in a restricted on their movement. Restriction of family size, they are allowed to have 2 children, not more than that. The forced labor, the male Rohingyas were also taken to the military camps for forced labor. Calling names, Rohingyas are frequently called as Kuwen in I think in Myanmar language, the illegal Bengali, or in Kala. They were sometimes labeled like that with their by the surrounding communities. In the name of anti-Alekin, like the clearance operation that Tatmadaw had conducted, the military force, they also cracked down on civilian and the kind of a village, and also young Rohingyas were detained. They were tortured, abducted, and even missing after this 2017 violence. We can see also a culture of violence, which already Dr. Neela has mentioned, like the social humiliation or indiscriminate beating, torture on the basis of false allegation of robbery, theft, confiscation of property, land, crops, cattle, and even teasing and stalking. So these kind of latent and manifest forms of violence were a regular phenomena against the Rohingya women and community people. In the manifest forms of violence in 2012, 2016, and 2017. So the actors, we can easily identify the Tatmadaw Myanmar military, the border guard police, and Buddhist Rakhine community to some extent. But the target was solely the Rohingya community, and mostly the worst case for the women, Rohingya women, because they had to face many forms of violence in this whole trajectory of sectarian and state-led violence from the beginning to the end in 2017. So gender-based violence in 2017 during the clearance of operation, we have like documented some of the cases of rape and sexual assault. Some of the respondents were willing to speak out, but some expressed in another ways, like in Bengali, they did a bad thing to them, or kharap kaj, they say it like that, but that's clearly mentioned the sexual violence and gang rape that was committed against them. Then the killing of relatives, partners, and children. Many women had lost their husband or intimate partner, their brothers, their fathers, and also even their lactating children. They had to live alone to save their life. They were forced to cross Bangladesh-Myanmar border because there are certain push factors, the fear of taking their lives. So just to save their life, they had to cross the border to take refuge in Bangladesh. Some women had to sell their ornaments, personal belongings, to collect money to facilitate this process to cross the river and come in Bangladesh. So it's a kind of a dangerous journey that they had to go through in 2017 after the August violence. So they had moved from the Arakan region to Bangladesh, crossing Naf River, and some people had also crossed the hilly mountainous area in the Bandarban region. Still, we have heard that some of the thousands people, Rohingya people, are still stranded in a Bandarban, Myanmar, this no man's land area. So they are still stranded there. So life in camps, the last phase, kind of a presentation. So when they are, being settled in a Rohingya refugee camps, particularly located in Ukhia and Teknaf Upazila of Coxbazar district in Bangladesh. So the survivors of gender-based violence of the Rohingya community who had managed to come in this country, so they faced post-violence kind of situation. So PSTD, kind of the post-violence trauma. Then they are facing also the health hazard caused by this at the beginning. They're caused by this gender-based violence, like gang rape, torture, physical assault kind of things. Exposed of sexually transmitted diseases, STD. They have heard of some sort of HIV, maybe there. The malnutrition and unwanted pregnancy caused by these sort of things, and a newborn child. In last year, almost 50,000 new child born in this Rohingya refugee camp. So these are kind of important issues they are currently facing in this camp area. Then coping mechanism. So now how they try to cope in a new camp life in Coxbazar, in this Teknaf and Ukhia camp. So there are some significant challenges that we have found during our study. Almost 55% of Rohingyas are children or minor among the 9 100,000 Rohingyas that are currently, residing in 27 camps. So among them, almost 30% are unaccompanied by their parents in Bangladesh. So basically, we can call them an orphan child. So managing this, the large number of orphan child in the camp is surely a challenge for the coping mechanism system. Among
Mr. Rahman, may I request to finish in 1 minute?
Yeah, obviously. So among the total like the population, 52% of our women and girl child, we have found a significant household headed by the widow and female headed household. Restriction of movement, like a lack of flight, fear of assault, abduction and trafficking, access to relief and treatment, cooking facilities, access to sanitation. Rough terrain make it difficult for the person with special needs and elderly people, which include male and female, to move around the camp area. We have also witnessed, the use of a domestic violence by the intimate person, dowry issues, polygamy, and child marriage. So coping mechanism, individual level, they try to manage to cope themselves. At the very individual level, the women-headed households, they try to find out their, mechanism of where they can find their cooking facilities, health treatment, and all these things. At the community level, the local manji is there, which is a very formal institution in the camp area or within the community. So they respond to the first at the domestic violence and violence-related issues in the camp. But at the same time, they can be act as a barrier to access to justice when the women, the survivor, try to get access to CIC at the camp area to lodge a formal complaint. At the institutional level, the coping mechanism was coordinated by the the protection. They have the GO and NGO and INGO organizations are working there. They provide the GBV, gender-based violence kind of protection, and also child protection issues. So child protection, they are providing these sort of facilities. There are, we have found a child-friendly space and also women-friendly space has been created in this camp area where the children and the women, destitute women, can go there. They share their grief experiences. Even we have found, a person in the camp who shared her experience with others because her husband left her and he got married in another camp. So they share their, they use their network, they share their grief, the information, and they are consolidated by the other community members. The way forward, what we have, stressed on the fact that we need a more kind of a research and documentation to assess the evolving Rohingya issues in a situation for dissemination and policy intervention. Proper documentation of the victims' narratives is important, because the ICG proceedings is going on. So if we have a proper kind of a documentation of these narratives, that will help you out to make this, our demand very fruitful. They need kind of a education or empowerment. Also, we, in camp areas, we need to expand our gaze on domestic violence, both in public and private spaces. If possible, a safe house or zones can be created for the women survivors or victims, because sometimes we have heard in the protection mechanism, kind of a providing officer, he shared the fact that when a formal complaint lodged in the CIC, so they try to mediate in a very
Mr. Rahman, 30 seconds, please.
Yeah. So it's better to keep them in a safe zone so that they can continue with this formal complaint and formal kind of a access to justice system. Norm setting and awareness setting or awareness program is must within the camp area to to educate the male partners or to create awareness among the community members on the gender violence issues and all these things. So it's an ongoing process. So let me conclude here, and thank you all for giving me the time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rahman. It's a very interesting research, interesting in a sense that how the Rohingya women and children, they experience violence at their home in Rakhine and throughout the process of atrocities, and once they are in the camps, perhaps they are not going through in a good shape, instead having a lot of trauma and experience of violence coming from Myanmar. We're having very limited time. Let me to invite Tanzina Rahman to present her work on resilience of the Rohingya hosting communities in Ukia and Teknaf, Cox's Bazar, just adjusting or strategizing for everyday survival. Tanzina Rahman, she's a very young researcher. She has a bachelor and a master's degree from the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies. Our area of interest are refugee migratory patterns and political and societal intolerance. I'd request Tanzina to take over, and it's all yours.
Thank you, sir. I'll begin the presentation by sharing my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is Tanzina Rahman. I'll be presenting a paper co-authored with Dr. Mohammad Tawhidul Islam. As our title suggests, we will be discussing the resilience of the Rohingya hosting communities of Ukia and Teknaf Upazilas in Cox's Bazar district. First, I'll talk about the background, the context. Bangladesh has been receiving quite a number of Rohingyas since the late 70s. And in the latest influx of 2017, the number increased to more than 800,000. The host communities in Cox's Bazar were initially welcoming to these Rohingyas, especially because the religious and linguistic similarities. However, as the time went on and the successive waves of Rohingyas kept coming in, things changed a bit. Here we will address the impact of Rohingya influx on the local communities and how they are dealing with this issue. So this is our research objectives and our research question. We wanted to be the positive and negative coping strategies and their gradual adaptation process, the sustainability of the resilience process, and the gradual change in perception. So we have presented our research question as how does the people of Cox's Bazar, our target population, Ukia and Teknaf, live side by side with the Rohingya population. We collected 75 micronarratives through field work over a span of 6 months in Ukia and Teknaf Upazila of Cox's Bazar. These rich narratives gave us detailed description of how the members of host communities have changed after experiencing the Rohingya influx. The narratives also informed us about the individual experience as well as the collective experience as a community. A little discussion about the concept of community resilience is important here. We have conceptualized community resilience as a process by which a population recovers from disaster. Resilience involves both adaptation strategies and coping mechanisms of a population in the face of an unexpected situation. Literature suggests that there are certain elements that are important in understanding a community's prospect for resilience. So here we have identified 4 dimensions of community resilience. I'm not going to give you an overview of this slide because I'll be talking about them in details in the following slides. So the first we'll discuss about the economic dimension. The people of the host communities in Ukia and Teknaf largely depend on agriculture, and about 1/3 of them live below the poverty line. The micronarratives we collected indicate the changes in income, their jobs, their businesses, and the rising prices of daily commodities and services after the influx. So the positive approaches taken by the local population involves taking advantage of the alternative employment opportunities offered by the NGOs that work in the area and receiving help from NGOs and government. Some of them are also growing food in their families to provide for their family. Those who can afford it are supplying materials or renting houses, which wasn't that profitable before the 2017 influx. But since many people are coming here to work, renting houses can make actually good money. So we can also see that not everyone can adapt to these positive strategies. Some had to take up underpaid jobs, which goes below their expectations and skill sets. Some day laborers had to leave the area to find jobs in other places because the Rohingyas worked for cheap in Uki and Teknaf. People gave up their primary jobs that centered around agriculture and looked for alternatives. People tried to buy things at a bulk from Cox's Bazar. Some even had to change their diets, like they were substituting protein with vegetables because they couldn't afford it anymore. Now we'll talk about the environmental dimension. So the hosts have identified resource resource scarcity to pollution in this dimension. And these are the ways they have tried to cope. People who could afford it placed hand pumps, deep motor pumps in their houses, in their land. Some were fortunate to receive assistance from the NGOs, but others had to reduce their water usage. Some had to fetch water from the neighboring houses. And for firewood, mostly people couldn't afford firewood anymore since they complained that the Rohingyas had cut down all their trees and firewood was very expensive. So they switched to gas cylinders, which was mostly provided by the NGOs and other like twigs and straws and electronics like rice cookers. About deforestation, they acknowledged how NGOs are helping revive the environment by planting trees. They have taken up small coping strategies like using masks, goggles, women wearing the traditional Islamic attire niqab to combat air pollution. Now, this dimension, I think, is the most interesting dimension because here we'll get to see the perception of the host communities. The host communities repeatedly complain about a lot of things, from traffic jam to security threat, their culture being a threat to drug trafficking. Okay, first we're going to talk about perception. We found three dominant perceptions among the local community about the Rohingyas. The first perception is conditional acceptance from a humanitarian ground, which is bolstered by religious affinity. The second perception is avoidance and rejection, which comes from a place of anxiety and identity crisis. And another group had mixed feelings where they did feel threatened by the Rohingyas, but at the same time, they tried to show compassion because Rohingyas are stateless people. But in all these three cases, everyone wanted a quick repatriation of the Rohingya community. The second one is their perception toward their own communities. Local people have often blamed their businessmen for raising the prices, opportunist population for engaging in illegal business like drug dealing. And interestingly, the local people aren't too keen of the non-local population who have come here to work. The outsiders, they see them as a threat to their culture and economy. Like they believe that their girls are not wearing hijab, burqa, because they're following the outsiders. These outsiders can afford to buy expensive things, so the businessman has fixed customers, so they won't lower their prices. Now I'll talk about the social hierarchy. The influx of the Rohingyas have changed the social hierarchy in some extent, where we see young people have found it easier to adapt. Mainly it's because of the jobs they found. Women are participating at an increasing rate in the workforce, which is making the conservative men in the community resentful. A small portion of the community have been fortunate enough to find support in their close relatives or other community members with help like getting a job, setting up businesses and such. In the competence sections, we wanted to see the flexibility and creativity of the hosts. So our data shows us how the hosts are patrolling the streets at night to stop theft and robbery. They are managing social deterioration like sexual harassment by forming organizations. And since the Rohingya influx, the day-to-day lives have changed, so they're switching to they have the option, available options to switch to the next best thing. Like they're getting Wi-Fi, they are doing their transaction via mobile banking like Bcash. This is the last dimension, institutional dimension. The data shows us that the relationship with the local authorities are somewhat mixed. Some are relying on personal connections. They have known these people even before the influx. So they think that the administration, the law enforcement agencies are just a phone call away. They are ready to help the locals at any cost, at any point. Many actually acknowledge the genuine effort of the law enforcement agencies. They do know that the hassle that they face, like they have to be checked at every checkpoint, they have to carry ID cards. It's all for the sake of their duty and managing the law and order situation. But a small portion of the population do have grievances. They feel like the Rohingyas might be getting more favors. They question diligence of all parties involved because of this delayed repatriation. From our micro-narratives, we have identified these as the main source of the community's resilience. It's mainly from the help from the tangible and intangible help from the government, the donors, the approaches of the state, and the host community has been generous enough to still show compassion to the Rohingya community, the job market, creating alternative employment, and people rationalizing their need to adapt and survive. They talk about how they believe the Rohingyas will live one day, things will go back to normal. They just have to bide the time, they just have to wait it out. The key concerns that our data presents mainly revolve around this late repatriation, because locals do not see a sustainable plan for the future with the Rohingyas living here. And the relationship between the locals themselves, relationship with the administration, with the Rohingyas are likely to get worse if repatriation drags on. And repatriation drags on. I will finish with the conclusion that our data suggests that how host communities in UCL and Teknaf have gradually developed, but I'll reiterate the negative impact of the late repatriation and want to emphasize how crucial governments and private sector's role has been in maintaining stability in that region. Because delayed repatriation, like I've said before in the previous slide, will deteriorate the relationship between the Rohingyas, between the host community themselves, the Rohingyas, and with the administration. Thank you. And one more thing, the pictures that were used in the presentations were from our field assistant, Mijanur Rahman and Mohammad Iqbal, and one was from Daily Star. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanzina, for being on time and finishing in 15 minutes and having a very good findings, observations from the ways host community people in Ifya and Cox's Bazar have been experiencing the influx and the way they have been dealing their daily life and the way they are accommodating or sterilizing their everyday life patterns. We have 7 minutes in our scheduled time. I'm not sure whether Bias would allow us another 5 minutes, then we will have altogether 12 minutes. And if Bias allows, then we could go for question and answer and discussion for next 12, 15 minutes, I would say.
Yes, please go ahead. You have 4 questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see Fazilatul Nisa Areen. She has a question to Niloy sir. Excuse me. How would you like to explain the role of the IGOs in terms of the environmental degradation of the host community? Are they being much aware of this issue, or if so, did you notice any evidence signs of working towards its improvement from your visit to camps? Let me to read out the question first, and I will request the respective presenters and others to answer. Rifat Islam Rupok, has the host community benefited in any way, like financially, because of the increased economic activities in the region? Fazilatul Nisa Orien again, as we know, because of the horrible experience back in Myanmar, the Rohingya women are going through a huge trauma. Due to this trauma, they might build a revengeful mentality, especially towards the Myanmar army or civilians. So my question is, what kind of steps are being taken to make sure that they don't build this vindictive nature in the long run? So it's to the panel. And I would request Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, Professor Amena Mohsin, and myself, if it is required, then we could also come into discussion.
Imtiaz would like to come back, or should I answer?
No, you go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead.
I think there's one interesting question regarding the IGOs, intergovernmental organizations' roles regarding environmental responsibility. What we found in the fieldwork was quite interesting. For example, the woods which were destroyed during the process of establishing the camps at the earlier stages of the settlement of the refugees in Cox's Bazar obviously had a lot of toll on the environment of the greater Cox's Bazar region. And it is definitely very important to take an account of the cost that Bangladesh has paid so far as the environmental degradation has taken place. The paths that elephants used to use and the forest that the has. But I think in 2019, I think it was the second time that or probably third time when we went there, we also found that there are some interesting changes and international agencies started giving natural gas in containers to use for the cooking. For the cooking purposes to the Rohingya refugees, and they take queues in morning probably twice a month or once a month, and they bring back the used tanker to get to refill the tanker for the next 2 weeks or something like that. I remember Atik and Tanzina was also in the field work, and they can probably supplement that as well. So international organizations have taken that into consideration, I think, even though it was not possible probably when the camps were established and it was difficult, so the destructions has taken place to the nature. And it is definitely important to take an account that what are the environmental costs that Bangladesh has taken place. To my personal opinion, I'm I'm sure that a day will come when Bangladesh government should definitely ask this to the international community, that we have lost this amount of, this is the cost of the environmental destruction that has taken place. But IGOs are, or the service providers in Cox's Bazar are quite concerned about the environmental cost of the entire processes of their service provision in the camps.
Can I just add to that? This is something Mr. Robert, the High Commissioner Robert, was also saying yesterday, that if you go now, you'll be quite surprised because of the replanting program has been so successful. It's much greener than a year before. So I guess somehow the ecology and the whole soil helps a lot, the environment that we have. So yes, it is an issue, but given the fact that replanting has been a serious concern for those who are working there, so I guess over time this is something probably we will be able to manage, rather than understand there will be environmental consequences in any way. But it now looks, given the success of the replanting and what Niloy was saying, alternative ways of, helping them to cook and use the alternative energy, etc. Probably the situation is not as bad as we thought in the beginning.
Mr. Roman?
Yeah, thank you, Tohid Bhai. I think the question from Fazilatul Nessa Orin, you have been asked about the kind of a, the trauma, if the trauma had a, might have a linkage with the development of kind of vindictive attitude or vindictive nature towards the Myanmar. We are particularly careful about when we did our research because we focus on a both the subjective reality and also the objective context. So when we conducted these micro narratives, we try to find out the discontinued the story. So we try to find a disconnected dot to make it more authentic, that they are not exaggerating their kind of the stories of violence and all these things. So first thing. Second thing is, when they are in here, so we have already identified that they are in a state of trauma. Okay, so it's very less likely the tendency that the trauma will turn to a vindictive kind of attitude. Rather, a trauma will have a different layers after layers that create more amnesia, more psychological disorder that these Rohingya women are currently facing in the refugee camps. So when we asked or when we conducted these micro narratives, they try to recall, and sometimes they faded away. We didn't get the actual the stories. So the surroundings community members, then they intervene, and then they provide a basic or sometimes the necessary information. So what I think or our research team has a thing that they're very less likely to become a vindictive kind of attitude towards them. Rather, when we talked with them, they want justice. They want to be documented, their stories, because already 3 years has passed away. So it's a 2017 August stories we are talking about. So 3 years already gone, and years after years, if these are not documented well, these stories will be fabricated. These stories will be that the true facts will be fabricated soon. So our urgency is to document it properly within a subjective and objective realities. That should be done. Okay, thanks. Madam, if you want to join something, so
yes, I would like to add on to that. Thank you, Atik. And the point I wanted to make to you, Orin, is that it is based on my research on the women of 71, and as well as this research. So I always try to make a like a comparison between the two. And what I have found, which Atik would also maybe substantiate, that it's not that you can say that you can't group them together as one category, that women would want this. Like from my 71 work, I have found that it depends on your level of education, on, also, your age, or the community in which you are living, or the level of awareness. Because I remember, like interviewing women in the Chittagong Hill tracts, and most of them just said that, their position was that we have left it to fate. Uh, God will do the justice. Similar things we found in the camps, isn't it, Atik? That it is something which was fated, and they will justice would be done to them. But when you talk to people, I'm talking of 71 incidents who are in Dhaka, who are based in Dhaka, uh, or who have been made aware. Uh, then they ask, they talk of different kinds of what you are talking of revenge. I mean, they ask for apology and different kind of things. But in the camps also, we have found that over the period of time, changes have taken place. When they came in 2017, it was sheer depression. They were willing to talk, and they said it, like it was fated. They don't know what to do. But with time, we have found that they have become more confident. They are talking of justice, and what justice, implies for them, I think it means several things. One is compensation, one is they want to go back, one they want to be rehabilitated. And that's where, ICJ comes in very strongly, the international community comes in very strongly. And I would also say that how their community respond to them, that is also very important. But when you talk of revenge, we found that this kind of attitude was there among the young boys, but somehow among the women we didn't see it. As yet we haven't seen it, but next time when we go to the field, I don't know, things might be different. Thank you.
Thank you. Tanzina, you want to add anything on the economic benefit? If no, then I would add something on that frontier.
Some people did, like I mentioned in the presentation, some people did
Are you?
benefit from the situation. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Okay, one portion of the population did benefit financially, because, like I've said in the presentation, they could access the job market that was created, but it was a bit disproportionate because not everyone got jobs, and the people who actually own lands and had the finances to build houses could rent it out. Uh, uh, People who had money to start businesses could supply materials to the camps, and like those people who did actually benefit from the from the impact of the Rohingya influx, but uh, not the whole community. So, would you like to add something?
Just one thing to add is that, of course, when the influx started, it has brought, I mean, the expectation from the people was not there anything. They wholeheartedly provided support to the destituted Rohingya people who came there. But over the period when the different institutions, the government, international community came with a different humanitarian assistance, it created some jobs for some of the people. But absolutely, as Tanzina mentioned, that is very disproportionate. And more important is that that more days the area has passed with Rohingya people, they see that the economic benefit, what is there, it's not that much convenient for them. Instead, it has, the whole situation has undermined the overall societal fabrics, environmental issues, land issues, and there are so many other social, I mean, ills like drugs and trafficking and so other, including prostitution. Those things has been increased. That to a great extent undermine the societal peace and stability, I would say. I mean, gradually that as the societal fabrics has been undermined. I'm not sure whether we have any more time. If we do not have,
Tawheed, yeah, no, I just want to respond. There is a question in the chat box by Leslie, and the question is, what is the extent of the violence suffered by the Rohingyas? um, and who is responsible? And I think she also has a follow-up question: is there expectation that with further delay exit of Rohingyas, there may be violent incidents, and what would happen? I think what is to be done. Just to make this clear, because this is often flagged both in the national and the international media regarding violence in the Rohingya camps. Our center, my Center for Genocide Studies, we work very closely with UNDP, and we map the violence inside the camps. We work with Bangladesh police and other law enforcement agencies. We map violence inside the Rohingya camps, and in last 37 months, that is 3 years, the death in the camp is 180, which would be monthly average would be less than five. But keep in mind, please, we have 1.1 million Rohingyas. Uh, any death is bad, even one death is bad, I understand. But monthly, it's less than five, with 1.1 million, which is a bigger population than Bhutan. Bhutan, of course, has a king. There's no king here. Uh, and Bhutan took 60,000 years. This became Bhutan inside Bangladesh in 3 months. So if you look at the number of deaths, which is 180 in 3 years, injury is 300, and incident is 564. Even if you double it, even if you say, well, death, you can't double it. Death is difficult to hide. Injury and incident, I can understand, can be more, and I will agree, maybe sometimes it's not reported, but death, it is impossible to hide in any way, and given the attention that all the camps have. So if there's 180, even if you double it, let me tell you honestly, it's much safer than New York. It's much safer than Detroit. It's much safer than Chicago. So I see the point that, as I said, one death is bad enough for the mother, but what I think the research ought to be is, how is it possible that 1.1 million people have so far remained so cool? Sometimes it amazes me. Sometimes, believe it or not, if you look, there has not been any riot so far between the host community. I understand so his work refers to the tension and all, but there has not been any serious riot. Even in the pandemic, when you have riots in different cities of the world, look at in New York, look at some of the European cities, but still, they have remained absolutely, I would say, relatively calm, and that ought to be researched, because we need to see why, what is there, what structures is helping them, the resilience part. What helps them this collective resilience they have. Is it civilizational? Because the Rohingyas are a very old civilization. They are part of the South Asian civilization, and South Asian civilization goes back to 6th century BC. It's not a young civilization region. It's a very old civilization. So I think those are the things sometimes we miss. Some of the refugee studies and some of the violence studies, they miss the context sometimes as to why people don't fight. Let's put it put that way. But I will say, so far, if you look at the 3 years data, relatively speaking, and I want to emphasize the word again, relatively speaking, it has remained quite, peaceful in a point that, to a level that, one should not worry. One should worry more about New York.
Thank you very much. The thing is, still, I to some extent agree that they have been calm for 3 years and relatively very peaceful camps. But how much they have interaction with the people living in Cox's Bazar, how that has been, uh, how how that relationship has been maintained, that is also important. Therefore, I believe there are some other points some of the attendees has pointed out. If there is no repatriation, what is the state them in Cox's Bazar? But the point is that it's not having them integration in Cox's Bazar or in Bangladesh. The point is that to put international community uh, in the scene, so that there is a convenient and conducive environment created in the Rakhine state in Myanmar, so that the people, Rohingya people who have been here, they could return to their home with safety, security, and with dignity. So with all these things, let me to conclude this session by thanking all the panelists and the researchers who have been involved in this research. I thank you very much for all of your contribution. Now I hand it over to Dr. Bias. Bias, what to you?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Tauhidul Islam, for moderating the session on Rohingya crisis and Bangladesh. So now I would like to welcome Dr. Niloy Biswas to moderate the next panel discussion on, so that's basically in conversation with Rohingya activists. Quickly, we have already introduced Dr. Niloy. He works as an associate professor in the Department of International Relations at the University of Dhaka. Dr. Niloy, and please, I would like to welcome you. You can start
Sure.
your
Sure.
session now.
Yeah.
And I can
Thank you.
see all your speakers are here.
Right.
Over to you. And you
Thank
have exactly an hour, please.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bas Ahmed. Yeah, it's a great opportunity again, and I have my co-moderator and facilitator of the conversation, Professor Miyako Hosoda here. Dr. Lamint has already joined. Mr. Zomin who has joined as well, and I can see Ms. Yasminullah as well on the screen. So let me just begin by saying that this is a fantastic opportunity to continue this 1 hour long session with renowned international Rohingya rights activist. I thank you all. We have Professor Miyako Hosoda, and I'm soon going to introduce all, my co-moderator and facilitator of the session, and also 3 co-panelists. But we need to definitely identify the significance of the voice of international Rohingya activists who are representing the diaspora, not only for the improvement of the communities in the countries where they are living now, but also the rights of the Rohingya people who are living in Bangladesh and also in Myanmar as a displaced citizens. Stateless citizens in their own countries. So this is important, and they have done quite significant achievements, particularly if one would like to mention the Rohingyas who are living in Canada or in other Western countries who have raised their voice about the rights of the Rohingya people particularly their repatriation and the changes in the legal structures of the state of Myanmar to accept the citizenships and so on and so forth. They have contributed in the activism, they have contributed in the scholarship. I had some opportunities to attend some of the webinars where they are meeting with themselves to raise the voice, raise the issues that are most pertinent to the rights of the rights of the Rohingya people. So let me introduce quickly my co-moderator and facilitator of the conversation, Professor Miyako Hosoda, and I also introduce 3 panelists, and then I will hand it over to Professor Miyako Hosoda to continue the conversation. Professor Miyako Hosoda graduated from the Department of Sociology, University of Tokyo in 1992, and received her MA and PhD in sociology from the University of Tokyo. After working as a research fellow for the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, she studied at Columbia University, Mailman School of Public Health, and Harvard School of Public Health. Professor Hosoda has been a member of Board of Trustee of the Japan Foundation of Cancer Research. She was elected president of the Asia Pacific Sociological Association and Sociology of Health, East Asia Sociological Association. In 2010, she was elected to the board of ISA Sociology of Health panel, and in 2018 to the position of the president. Professor Hosoda is one of the prominent researchers based in Japan who has been working on the rights of the Rohingya people, and it's fantastic to have Professor Hosoda as the facilitator of the conversation. We also have, as I have mentioned, Mr. Jo Min Toot, who is president of Burmese Rohingya Association in Japan. Mr. Jo was born and raised in Muangdu, Rakhine State. He earned his bachelor from Myanmar's prestigious Yangon University in 1995. Due to his participation at the university student protest against Myanmar military junta in 1996, he had to flee his home country and reach Japan to seek asylum, where he is still struggling to promote genuine democracy, peace, equality, and human rights for the Rohingya people all over the world. He joined Burmese Rohingya associations in 1999 and became its president in January 2001. So we welcome Mr. Jomin Toot. We have with us Dr. La Mint, who is president of Rohingya Intellectual Community Association of Australia. Dr. Mint is an Australian educated academic who is a senior member of the Arakan Rohingya National Organization, and Dr. Mint works as an academic both in Australia and the United States. He's heavily engaged with international Rohingya advocacy and the Rohingya movements in Australia to stop abuses of human rights and defenseless people, Rohingya people in Burma. So Dr. Mint has participated several national and international conferences in relations to raise his voice and the community's voice to address the issues of Rohingyas. Finally, we are glad to have Ms. Yasmin Ullah. Ms. Yasmin Ullah is a Rohingya activist and particularly is a women rights activist. She was born in the township of Butidong in Rakhine State before fleeing to Thailand in 1995. Along with her parents, she remained a stateless refugee in Thailand until 2011, when she migrated to Canada. Yasmin served as a president of Rohingya Human Rights Network, a non-profit group led by the activists across Canada that raises voice and public awareness of the gross human rights violations against the Rohingya community. She also mobilizes the international community to actively condemn and combat the ongoing genocide against the Rohingya people. We are glad to have you all. Thank you so much. Professor Miyako Hosoda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Dr. Niraj. So tonight or today, so we had a wonderful Rohingya panelist from Japan, Australia, and Canada. More than a million of Rohingya people have been displaced, and many around the world are the diaspora state. After being deprived of Rohingya nationality by the crackdown in 1970s, today's panelists too. They went abroad to escape the persecution shown in their homeland, Myanmar. So today, we have a lot of audience who really want to hear the real voice of Rohingya diaspora. And I propose the 3 topics. The first one is to ask a panelist to talk about their life history. The second topic is the efficacy and the influence of your activities in your community. The third topic is about how the panelists recommend as a sustainable solution of Rohingya crisis. So let's start the first topic. So I would like to ask all panelists to talk about your short biography. Please tell us your journey from Myanmar to your current place and your activities and role to advocate the human rights of Rohingya people. So each panelist will have 4 or 5 minutes. So the first, the Mr. Zomintu, please tell your story.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for organizing the conversation, and I really appreciate everyone and each of you to help us to talk about ourselves and our community. And my name is Mintut. It is a Burmese name. Actually, my name is Lukman Hakim in a Rohingya language. I was born and raised in Mongdo in Arkan State and studied at the University of Yangon. And for my activity against the Burmese military government, and I have to flee my country in 1998 and came to Japan to seek asylum. And I have been recognized first Rohingya in Japan as a refugee in 22. And since then I have been heavily actively I have been trying to promote the human rights of Rohingya people especially, and the Burmese democratization process in Japan. And I take the position of the Burmese Rohingya Association in Japan, and I try to help all the Rohingya community in Japan to have the legal status in Japan. Fortunately, almost all the Rohingyas have a legal status in Japan, except a few Rohingya asylum seekers are still seeking their legal status, and I hope the Japanese government will help them as well in the very near future. So we have a very small community in Japan. We only about 100 Rohingya people came to Japan to seek asylum, and including our children and our family members, now we become 300 to 350 Rohingyas in Japan. And among them, most of the children are Japan-born children, Rohingya children. So our community is not very much bigger like in Australia and all the other countries, or in the Canada or the other Western countries, because it is very, very difficult to come to Japan as a Rohingya. So we are very small still, but we are struggling with the Japanese government to get the full support of their on the Rohingya causes. I really appreciate to the Japanese people. They are very generous and very helpful to the people. But the problem is with the Japanese government. Our problem is with the Japanese government. We have been trying as a organization, Burmese Rohingya Association in Japan, we have been trying to approach the Japanese government to convince them to support the Rohingya causes. Unfortunately, till today, Japanese government doesn't recognize us as a Burmese citizen like the Burmese government. Even Japanese government, they don't call us Rohingya. They call us the Muslim in Rakhine state, just like the Aung San Suu Kyi call us. So we have the continuous relationship with the Japanese Foreign Ministry. Even in every 2-3 months we have a meeting and we briefing our information, our suffering, the refugee problem in Bangladesh and the refugees in other countries as well. We are continuously pushing them to have some kind of the help not only the humanitarian assistance, but also the human rights issues and our political process, political problem to solve in Myanmar. As you know, the last 1 week ago, Japanese ambassador and the Japanese Prime Minister, Special Envoy, Mr. Sasakawa, was heavily involved in the Rakhine State peace problem. The civil war fighting with the Rakhine Buddhist AA and the Myanmar military government. And he involved and he tried to make a ceasefire. Now, more than 3 weeks, there was no fighting even in Rakhine State. So Japanese government is the most, in my view, Japan is the most important country for Myanmar, because Japan is the biggest donor country to the Myanmar government and to the Myanmar military. So I think they have the very big leverage to influence the Myanmar government on the crisis of the Rohingya problem. So I am appealing to the Japanese government and for almost 2 decades to convince them to support the Rohingya problem, because Rohingya, in my view, Rohingya problem is the very easiest one in comparison of the other problem in Myanmar, because the other people, other ethnic groups in Myanmar are fighting for their separate state or the separate country or something like that. But Rohingyas are not fighting for that kind of the separate state or anything else. Rohingyas are asking only for their basic rights, recognition of their citizenship, recognition of their ethnic identity, and our respect our basic rights. We are asking as a basic human rights. Basic human rights means every human being should be equal, born in equal. So we are discriminated for 5 or 6 decades by the Myanmar successive military government. But now there is not the military government. There is a civilian government led by a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So we are expecting from that government to respect our basic human rights. And on this case, Japan government has a very big leverage, and also the international community has the very big responsibility to protect the Rohingya people, because we are alienated from the countries, the other sister communities. And one point I want to mention here is there is no any friends in our country because of the Myanmar military government's continuous propaganda against the Rohingya people, claiming the Rohingyas are interlopers or illegally came from Bangladesh. But it is not the true. The Rohingya has historically from the Myanmar. And I didn't have much time to explain about the historical points of the Rohingya problem. But the international community has the responsibility to protect the Rohingya people under the international human rights perspectives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Domingo. Thank you. Yeah. So we move the second panelist, Dr. Hera Mint, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to first of all thank all the kind audience and the government of Bangladesh and other government and the government of Canada, Gambia, for extending and exhibiting support to the Rohingya and our plights, our problem. At the outcast, I would like to say, at the moment, my biography has been already outlined by Professor Niloy. I just want to add a little bit, not more. I'm an academic in Australia and in the United States. I was educated in Turkey and Australia. I did my undergrad in Turkey, and I did my postgraduate qualification, master's and PhD in Australia. And I work in Australian University, and now at the moment I also work in the United States. I'm a computer scientist and computer engineer, or you can say I'm an academic. In relation to the Rohingya issue, I've been heavily engaged with the international advocacy efforts. I've been to UN, I've been to Geneva. So I was even at the ICJ when Gambia has lodged its file against Myanmar in 2019. And at the beginning of the violence in 2012, I have initiated lots of projects in Australia. The former foreign minister, which is a very good friend of mine, Bob Carr, I went to meet him, and at my request, he went to Rakhine State in 2012. Since I was educated in Turkey, my good friend, former Prime Minister Ahmed Davutoğlu, also visited in Rakhine State in 2013. Afterward, we initiated the Arakan Rohingya National Organization has initiated a case at ICC with the help of another friend of mine, Gareth Evans, in 2015. Now we're seeing the results at ICC. Gareth Evans, he's the architect of the emerging humanitarian norm, which my good friend Mr. Zomington has just briefly outlined, known as responsibility to protect. From that outside, I just want to touch some grounds, some latest situation on the ground. As you know, there was an election recently held in last November, and Aung San Suu Kyi has won a landslide elections. However, though she has consolidated her support among the vast majority mainstream, or what you can call the vast majority of the mainstream Burmese society. At the same time, she has distanced herself from minorities, particularly the Rohingyas, because the minorities, that includes the other groups and the Rohingya, that they think they've been alienated, and because Aung San Suu Kyi has failed to consult the decision that they make, which affects the life of every minority. On top of that, there are lots of international research, and NGOs have presented with the evidence that the government of Aung San Suu Kyi, along with the military, has committed genocide and mass atrocity crimes against the Rohingya people, by citing the fact that we can see it's obvious that in 2017, Burmese government has expelled 750,000 Rohingya, which constitute the 80% of Rohingya population, to Bangladesh through a genocidal act, and the remaining Rohingya population in Burma are subject to apartheid system. The apartheid system which once existed in South Africa before the Mandela era. From its inception to until 1994, South Africa used to apply a system known as apartheid, which now Burmese government has copycated so that they can apply against Rohingya people.
Dr. Excuse me, but could you please make your cell phone or PC stable? Otherwise, we can see, the unnecessary movement. Thank you very much.
Oh, I see. Okay, is it okay now? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, better. Thank you.
And there are lots of UN initiatives, but the largest speak in the UN is predominantly failed to provide protection to the to Rohingya because Security Council is paralyzed. However, the EU, the Australian government, Canadian government, and the US and UK has imposed some restricted sanctions to some specific generals who are responsible for atrocity crimes against the Rohingya people. And on the other hand, I think I think there's going to be a rotational basis talking. We're going to talk about the recommendation that we're going to suggest at the end of the period. Am I correct? Hello?
Yeah.
So, as from my perspective, the Rohingya issue is not an internal issue. It's because Rohingyas are the victims of international crimes. These genocides and war crimes are, the crimes falls upon the jurisdiction of the international community. So there are those who passionately argue in Burma that the Rohingya issue is an internal issue, and then foreign powers or international community does not have a say on their internal affairs. I think they're very much delusional. So what we think at the outset that by the statement made by the UN envoy on 22nd of September that the situation in Rakhine State poses a grave concern for the international community because the Burmese army and the Burmese government is committing mass atrocity crimes by forcing by using human shields, by using civilians and human shields and killing innocent Rohingya boys who were forced to clean the landmines for the armies to have a safe period from the potential enemy fire. That happened last October 2020, and then these are the very obvious example of war crimes are still ongoing. Okay, despite the fact ICJ has provided a provisional order for Burma to follow, they're not following that. In that sense, the Security Council, just after ICJ has provided a provisional order to Burma, reiterated the fact that Myanmar should follow the order that been provided by ICJ, the provisional order. So far, we have seen no indication of following the order that has been outlined by ICJ. So, on top of that, Canada and Netherlands has came into the aid of the government of Gambia, who have lodged a file against our Rohingya people. We highly applaud that. And from the Australian perspective, Australian government is very sympathetic to the cause of Rohingya people. They are also the current foreign minister and prime minister strongly support the fact that those who are responsible for mass atrocity crimes, namely genocide and crimes against men, should go to ICC or must have faced a kind of accountability. And that's all what I would like to add at the moment. If you have any further question, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hera. So, the rest. So, Yasmin Ora, please tell us your story and your current activity as a Rohingya activist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hosoda. Thank you, the organizer who actually invited me to be part of this very important discussion. I'm very, very happy happy and honored to be here and to share some of the things that I've been doing. But first of all, I needed to correct a little bit of information. I'm no longer the president of the Rohingya Human Rights Network. A new person, someone who's actually from the refugee camps herself, is currently serving as the president. I'm still currently working as an activist and focusing a little bit more on my education just to finish my degree. But I digress. My work actually didn't begin until late 2017, because as a young Rohingya person, being displaced so many times in my life, I was cut off from my roots. Basically, I was a little bit confused about my own identity. It was an existential crisis for some time that I went through. Now, in 2017, as I was establishing my roots here in Canada and starting to accept that this is now my reality, this is now who I am, I'm going to have this hybrid existence. I would have identities that I would pick up along the way. So I am a Rohingya, but I was brought up in Thailand. So I speak the language and I learned the culture, but then now I'm in Canada, I have to adapt to the new society and become Canadian. And so there's this hybridization. I would like to coin that if that word doesn't exist. It's almost like the hybrid existence that I think a lot of Rohingya children are in the same boat. The work started in 2017 because of the clearance operation by the military that was carried out, and my family was directly affected by the clearance operation, that they had to flee on foot. We were not able to track them down until many days later. Fortunately, they're still safe to this day, but it sort of avalanched into the need, for the recognition that there is an urgency within the entire struggle as a Rohingya. As a Rohingya in existence in a new country, being a refugee, but also at the same time, how do I continue to support my family back home, even though I am very far and detached from my own identity as a Rohingya, belonging to my own homeland. So that's started I started to organize protests and did a little bit of fundraising. I didn't really have any of those skills until much later that I was able to be helped through the process and started to become more fluent in the language of negotiation and the fluency in the policy making language. So that came with time, and it took a lot of learning curve for sure, but I slowly connected with other people, which was the integral part of all of this, is how I started to connect with people outside of Vancouver and slowly across Canada, and starting to get to know the community, the Rohingya Canadian community here. And I traveled to meet many members of parliament in Ottawa, the capital of our country. And then meeting even more people sort of helped me brainstorm with them on how we can strategize and engage with the policymakers here in Canada. And slowly we moved our strategy to a little bit of a bigger space in not just engaging with the policymakers, because they cannot be pushed unless there's a public behind it. So we started to think about how we can strategize apart from doing, protests or rallies. We started to, curate events, and then slowly moved on to connecting with the museums. So there are two major museums that we've worked with, the Canadian Rohingya community here. So one is the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and the other is the Montreal Holocaust Museum. The reason these two institutions are really important is because one has a lot of work around human rights in Canada and abroad, but the other has a direct link to the Holocaust, which we can draw example from, because the process of genocide during the Nazi Germany is somewhat, has a lot of similarities to what we're currently going through in terms of process of othering or process of erasure of identities as Rohingya in the country and throughout the times as we become diaspora. And so it was really important that we set in motion some of these, concerns, and we started to connect with various different institutions. And then once we started to share our stories, we turned the stories of the Rohingya Canadians and how they struggled to come to Canada to actually resettle and find their new identities here in Canada. We turned that into an oral history project, and it was actually archived. It's become a part of the National Archive, which proves that we're part of the fabric of the Canadian society, which was a really, really important landmark. Many of the photos that we've selected, there were other, artifacts that we've collected, and now it became a full-fledged exhibition called Time to Act Rohingya Voices. And that was the first time in our history that there is a word written on a wall of a federally funded institution that connects and actually recognize Rohingya as an identity of a people, rather than just, a Rohingya as a quote or a name that's just not fully recognized. And so that helps propelled a lot of the actions that follow suit, because at that time, during the time that we were struggling to put all of this together, we were also engaging with policymakers in Canada, and that sort of helped us make a case for the Rohingya to actually be recognized more within the Parliament. And in 2018, the Canadian Parliament, both the Senate and the House of Commons, actually passed a motion unanimously to recognize the atrocities that Rohingya have gone through as a genocide, which was one of the first few countries that have actually done that, and remains the first few. And that was really, really important, because then the entire community, so backtracking a little bit, is that at the start, at the very beginning of our ask and our demands and our meetings with lots and lots of people in Canada in the policymaking realms, or with the INGOs or civil society groups here that are working on human rights issues, we continuously use the word genocide. And this is very commonly done. Actually, across the globe, every single Rohingya Rohingya activist specifically use this term in order for it to incite a legal mechanism that would follow suit when the word is used and recognized by policymakers or nation states, then it could hopefully trigger some sort of international justice mechanism in order to bring in the part on the accountability. And so soon afterwards, we continuously work on this, and we continue to work with the Holocaust Museum, Montreal Holocaust Museum, on a genocidal tool, which helps teachers across Canada teach genocide studies, but drawing from the example of a Holocaust survivor in comparison to the process of othering that are experienced by Rohingya. And not only that, we the exhibition is still up and going. It will end early next year. But all of this is to prove that there are many parts and parcels when it comes to trying to affect policy changes and trying to change, from a mass atrocity. How do we address it in the first place? We need to recognize how whether or not the public is engaged, or whether or not the public is actually aware of who we are. And the answer was that they actually don't even know who Rohingya are. Most of the time, whenever I actually, at the beginning of doing all of this, I would tell people I'm a Rohingya, and they're like, what's that? And so there's a lot of educational pieces. Also, the public awareness is important. And then, moving forward to how do we affect a larger changes in the institutions that are involved that can actually help us make those changes much, much more as a ripple effect, much bigger than we personally can. And so slowly we were able to, establish this connection with the Canadian government and ensure that we continue to push them, specifically on the case of ICJ. We asked them to initiate the International Court of Justice case, but fortunately, Gambia actually took on the case first. But now, because we continuously push that Canada has a strong stance on the human rights, and it actually claims itself to be a champion of women's rights. So because the mass sexual violence, sexual and gender-based violence have been an integral sort of campaign within the clearance operation to intimidate and inject fear within the Rohingya identity, it is important that Canadian government gets involved as soon as possible. And so we were really happy that the Canadian government, at the suggestion and demands of so many people, apart from the Canadian Rohingya community, that they agreed to intervene. So we're looking forward to do much, much more, especially on the fact that Canadian government have actually pledged $300 million 3 years ago, but haven't really changed or haven't really committed to more fundings for to help the Rohingya situation. So that's in the work, and we're hopeful that we'd be able to continue to engage and do much more on this part and create a larger change.
Thank you very much, Miss Yasmin. So the Canadian the challenge is very inspiring, and the other country can be learn from the Canadian experience, I think. So maybe I think it's time to pick up some questions from the audience. So Dr. Niroy, could you please ask the questions from the audience?
I can thank you, Professor Miyako. I can see two questions, and this is probably specific to Mr. Jomin too, because it's about the the standpoint of the Japanese government. But I'm sure Professor Miyako can also supplement, and also Dr. Mint and Ms. Yasmin can also follow it up in the conversation of the next topic. Jay Leslie talks about as ASEAN is badly divided between those who support Myanmar and those who do not, would best hope be for the new US administration to pressure the new Japanese Prime Minister to recognize Rohingyas as true citizens of Myanmar, deserving grant of full citizen status and all state protection, return to their lands where they lived, and massive compensation of what has what was destroyed and agreeing to need for the prosecution of all war criminals. So a Western Japanese collaboration to put pressure more on the Myanmar government. There's the other one is more like an observation. M. Talukdar says Japan should put pressure on Myanmar to give them their citizenship back in addition to Japanese identity. So, Mr. Jomintu, probably.
Yeah, thank you very much. A Rohingya problem for the sustainable solution, there is only one way, in my view, to repatriate all the refugees in Bangladesh camps and other places to Myanmar with their basic rights of citizenship, ethnic rights, security, and dignity. To do that, a strong international pressure is needed. To garner this kind of the strong international pressure, I would like to request to the Bangladesh government should work vigorously with the international community, especially with the U.S. new government, upcoming government of United States, European Union, and Japan, and India, and China, using their good friendship diplomatic channel. I think recently, 1 month ago, there was a security alliance like with the Japan, India, United States, and Australia. So using this channel, I think Bangladesh government can persuade the alliance to press the Myanmar government. And one more thing, we Rohingya people are solely relying on Bangladesh because most of the Rohingya refugees are hosting by the Bangladeshi generous people. We are really thankful to the Bangladesh people and the Bangladesh government. We understand the Bangladesh government is doing really hard, but still there needs some a strong diplomatic approach to especially to Japan and Australia and United States and European Union. As you know, China is opposing any strong international pressure on Myanmar because China is protecting the Myanmar government and Myanmar military. Behind our problem, we assume that China is one of the major players. So we need to convince China as well. So I like to invite all you participating today, all scholars and the other people, I like to invite to give some more attention on the Japan policy on the Rohingya issue in Myanmar. Because Japan is the most important country, especially related to the Myanmar. As I said before, Japan is the biggest donor, financially support us, and one of the biggest investor in Myanmar. So Japan has a lot of kinds of the channel to press the Myanmar government, to convince the Myanmar government to give the Rohingyas basic rights, to recognize the Rohingyas as the citizen of that country. So Japan has a very good, Japan is in a very good position. I am really ashamed today when I heard my sister Yasminullah said they are very grateful to the Canadian government. We Rohingya people are very grateful to the Canadian government. But I am ashamed today. I have been working very hard with the Japanese government and the Japanese parliamentarians and with the Japanese scholars and Japanese experts to convince the Japanese government. But today, I have to confess you, I am a failure. I failed. I am really, really disappointed. We Rohingya people in Japan are very disappointed with the Japanese government policy on the Rohingya people because Rohingya peoples are disappearing. Myanmar government is exterminating the Rohingya people for so long. I'm not raising this question not only today. Since I came to Japan, I have been trying to raise the voices with the Japanese government, Japanese parliamentarians, the Japanese scholars, even the Japanese university students. So till today, Japanese people are some sorts of very generous, or they are very understandable. But the Japanese government policy is very, very conservative policy they are using, and they don't want to they antagonize with the Myanmar government and the Myanmar military, because they want to do the very big business with the Myanmar government. So we need to try in all the available tools we need to apply to press the Japanese government, because it is the most important government for Myanmar for so long. As you know, the current Myanmar military was formed by the Japanese military in 1941. So they have a very good relationship with the military to military and the government to government. And the Japanese government is the biggest supporter of Aung San Suu Kyi as well. I believe Aung San Suu Kyi will listen what the Japanese government says to her. So we need a strong pressure and collaborated collective pressure on Myanmar, especially from Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Yes,
very
sir.
much, Dr. Zalmit. Mr. Zalmit. Yeah, I totally understand.
Can I intervene?
Yeah,
Can I?
sure, of course,
Yes.
please.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Miyako. Good to see you again. No, since I know Yasminullah for quite some time, I haven't met Jomin,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
but I'm familiar with the Rohingya diaspora. I think it is important, and this I've talked to Yasminullah earlier also. A political leadership of the Rohingyas ought to come out. This is very critical. Because whenever Myanmar talks with others, they always would refer to ARSA, and they will always talk about militancy and all. I think it's high time that political leadership, even at a global level, of the Rohingyas should be established. And Ms. Yasminullah can actually take this to the Canadian government, given the Canadian government's support. We will have the Canadian High Commissioner will be speaking in the next panel. Maybe he can also throw us some light. But I think support from the Canadian government in putting this political leadership is very important, because if there is no political leadership at the global level, what happens is it becomes an issue either of Bangladesh or Myanmar or something. But it is actually issue of Myanmar with the Rohingya people. And so quicker the political leadership comes out, and then extraordinary leaders. I know extraordinary people in the diaspora and also in Bangladesh. There are extraordinary Rohingyas who can easily come together at one point. Now it's webinar is also there. The technology can also help in bringing this leadership. And once that leadership is formed, they can actually bargain because at the end of the day, it is their rights, it is their identity, it is their kind of life and living. So my comment here. Well, I don't know whether Yasminullah Jomin would want to respond, but my thing is, I'm from a political science background, so political leadership is absolutely essential. And if Canadian government, I understand Japanese government, at least not now, maybe, but the Japanese civil society can help. Miyako and others, there's a strong civil society in Japan, and I think the Japanese civil society, we don't have to depend on the government if the government is on the wrong foot. But the civil society is on the right foot. The Japanese civil society has been very proactive. So are the civil society in India and some other countries. So even if they come to help in building this political leadership along with the Canadian government support and some other government as well, we have we have other governments, and Netherlands, for example, is also very important. So let's think about in those terms so that we can win over whatever the Myanmar's negative discourse is all about. Thank you.
Can I respond to that a little bit, please?
Please, Yasmin, go ahead.
I do agree on the part that we probably are in dire need of political leadership that are more consolidated, but at the same time, taking into consideration the fracture, the fragmentation within the community, not just through infightings, not just through, you know, the usual leadership issues, but the identity crisis, the existential trauma, the, you know, the various different historical buildup that comes from not being allowed to speak or being erased off of a country. It all comes down to that, and it really doesn't help when we have actually advocated even before 2017, and you know, these two gentlemen, my co-panelists, have been working much longer than I have, and they have had the same experience. My father actually worked on the Rohingya issue in Thailand for 20 plus years. And it still was the same issues. Yes, nation states are willing to engage with us so long as the public is interested. But it's continuously this pushing and push and pull and push and pull that doesn't end. I understand that there's also this element of hesitance that comes from endorsing an entire group of people and in saying that they're completely innocent, or you know, the perception of that at least is not very very much in line with what Canadian government or the Dutch government or many other nation states that actually stand for human rights. I don't think that that's in line with their policy to actually endorse us entirely or say that we're going to help you build leadership, because I think that they see that as an overstep. But I agree that there can be a lot of potential that the government can help. And I've continuously asked as much as I could from the Canadian government and other nation states that are working on this issue to support people on the ground, to support the Rohingya-led civil society groups in the refugee camps, to support the civil society groups in Myanmar, so that once we build that allyship that's strong enough that we can bridge the gap and actually bring them together. And that is very much in line with what, you know, the various international communities, nation states could do. So I hope that enlighten a little bit of that discussion.
Thank you very much.
Sir, can I
add a comment, please? Hello. Mm-hmm.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, in relation to the consolidated political power within the Rohingya community, I think the vast majority of the Rohingya community are at the same page. So when it comes to the core issues like defending our rights, demanding for the citizenship right, repatriation policies, we're quite pretty much on the same page. It is literally the case in many societies all around the world, and you will not find an absolute unity platform. It's literally impossible. It's not possible. So whenever the Burmese government is always trying to see the half, there's a policy called glass is half full, half empty. So they're saying from the negative perspective, it is, whenever there is a political fight against two groups, the hostile group always trying to promote or trying to articulate the negative aspects of the opposition, what you call it, the hostile group. It's very natural for them to say the Rasa is represented by the Rohingya, Rasa is the main representative of the Rohingya, whereas in the reality, that's not the case. It is because the Burmese government does not have a political will to resolve our issue, as Bangladeshi government is very much aware, so is the international community, because the Rohingya exodus has been ongoing literally for the last 60 years. The 2017 exodus is not the first, it isn't the first one, it's I think the fifth one. So based on that, one can draw a conclusion that the Burmese government does not have a political will to accept Rohingya as citizens. They're always trying to find the flaws of the Rohingya community, which which they are primarily responsible of it, okay? They're the one who's denying all kind of rights for the Rohingyas. So they're making all kind of, backbiting, demonizing the Rohingya, vilifying the Rohingya community at all time. So it has to be very, so if you're talking about to forming the unity within the Rohingya community, we are united. On the other hand, the narrative of the Burmese government, I don't think it's internationally acceptable. Therefore, I have some, so far, even Burmese authority has not so far complied with the ICJ provisional measure. They're fully liable, for their actions. So, to force them to act a responsible global citizen, the international community have to take an active role. They have to impose the sanction that binds them, to force them, to accept the Rohingyas as their own citizen. In the repatriation process, we still have a problem. The foreign secretary said in our previous session that the government on the other side of the border does not have a political will to do anything. So how can we force them? That's the mechanism that we have to formulate. The best way is to do through lots of mechanisms, tools are on the table. We have to try them one by one. Let's see which one works. There's a mechanisms. There are lots of mechanisms, ICC, ICJ, there's on going on top. It's going to take a long time. We need to have a very deterministic or detrimental actions against the government in Burma so that they can see the deterrence force that will come into place if they don't take the Rohingyas, which have been living in Burma for long before the existence of Burma. In Bangladesh, there are Burmese Rakhine people are living in Chittagong in hill trade. They are enjoying their own autonomous status. In Burma, there are lots of ethnic groups. All of the ethnic group are the borderland people, and these borderland people speak the language of both sides of the international border. For example, the Shan people speak Thai language. Okay, the Kachin people speak Chinese, and the Qing speak a similar language spoken in India. That doesn't seem to be an issue for the central Burmese government, including Aung San Suu Kyi. So this point needs to be firmly raised by the international actors, including Bangladesh, UK, Australia, when they talk with or engage with the Burmese government. So the similarities between the borderland is it's a universal fact that exists in US, that exists in European nations like Switzerland, Belgium. Why the Burmese government is making an issue of it? So this is the point that you have to raise to the Burmese government with a stronger voice. And this is my point. That's what I would like to say. Thank you so much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much.
May I add a minute?
Sure.
Thank you very much, Professor Imtiaz sir. I met you in Germany in 2018, and what you saying, I totally agree with you. We don't have a strong political leadership among ourselves. I totally agree with you. We are destitute people for 6 or 7 decades under the military government. And we are in the diaspora and we are in several different countries. But I can promise you one thing. We are seriously in a very serious process to have this kind of the collective leadership to implement. We are in the process we have the registered political parties in Myanmar. We have the leaders in Myanmar as well. We have the leaders in diaspora as well. So we are trying to combine all together in a process. Inshallah, we will be in a very near future, we will show the world community what they want to have a collective leadership. We are in the process. We are trying really hard to talk with each other, everyone. So we need your help. We need your help. Without your help, we cannot do anything by ourselves because we are the weakest people in the world. We don't have anything. As you know, we have not more than 3% educated people in our community. So we are deinstitutionalized under the military government for several decades. So we need your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I would add one more point. with respect to the security issue that was also raised yesterday. So long as this problem, the status quo has not changed, the situation poses a grave security threat, both not only within the region, also worldwide. So the longer it takes, the people on the ground may become radicalized, so it will become a security issue. And security issue needs to be taken very seriously, as my good friend Masud Mubin, the Foreign Secretary, has stressed out yesterday. So it is in the interest of all within the regional or either organization or the UN to take the action as swiftly or soon as possible. There are lots of precedents all around the world that lots of intervention has taken place with or without the approval of the UN. If you see the example of Kosovo, it was initiated by Tony Blair within the parameter that he introduced, which is called the reasonable means to have an intervention. I think our case does qualify for this kind of threshold. I don't want to go to details in the intervention. Intervention is a subject or agenda which there's a less appetite for the appetite for the international intervention in the international community is very significantly low. I'm very conscious of that, but this has to be bringing to the table because all actions need to put on the table in order to resolve the Rohingya issue. This is the point that I would like to stress.
Thank you very much. So the discussion will continue, but unfortunately it is a time. So I'd like to thank all the panelists and the participant audience. So as we talked, nation state and civil society and public opinion may have different sometimes. For example, in Japan, I'm so sorry that government is not properly addressing the Rohingya issues. However, civil society and mass media are working to eliminate human rights violation and genocide in response to the Rohingya issues, similar to the movement of the United Nations and other international community. There are also citizen groups and individuals who support the Rohingya people in the Rohingya refugee camps, and even some elementary school children make fundraising to send stationery and educational materials to children in refugee camps. I sincerely hope that this civil society movement will change the government and help solve the Rohingya issues. We can be stronger if we work together. Thank you again. So let's continue to work together to solve these issues. So we'll close this session. Thank you, Dr. Neroy, and our panelists and audience.
Just like to quote one sentence that there are very interesting observations in the Q&A box. I'd like to request all three panelists to read out some of the observations. Those are not questions always, so probably be very interesting to you as well. Thank you so much, Professor Hosoda. Thank you, all of you. We are very grateful for your presence and active participation.
Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is to Dr. Bias Ahmed.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Niloy, and all other co-moderators and panelists. It was really, I enjoyed the session and hopefully our attendees. Now we will go for 60 minutes of lunch or dinner break, and we'll be back at 1:30 p.m. GMT, just after 60 minutes. And I would request our attendees not to log out and just mute yourself or stop your video, and see you after an hour. Thank you.
Thank you.
All.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So our next session would be on International Court of Justice. That's really important, and we look forward to it. Okay, see you in an hour.